bottom lockers, they're lesser class of humans. You want to be a top locker.
You do want to be a top locker. Okay.
Hello! Should we introduce ourselves again?
Yes.
Okay. I'm still Loda.
And I'm still Sarah.
We're still, and that's still Katie, and we're still Fulbright English teaching assistants in La Rioja, Spain.
And we're back at it again today with another video in our cultural comparison series. Today we're going to be talking about the Today we're going to be talking about some of the differences between the Spanish school systems and the US school system. So there's a lot of differences between the school system, which makes sense because it's different countries, the way that they run, their public schools or even private schools are going to be completely different. And
I feel like we're really low. Like see how low we are in the frame?
Yeah. Schools in different countries, of course, are going to have differences between the way that they run things, the expectations that they have for the students, how things generally look, and what's just the norm for the school. So today we're going to talk about some of those differences are that we've observed, what we see here in Spain versus what we see in the US, and maybe an opinion or two.
So the first thing we wanted to look at, I don't think I actually fully realized, but it's that there is a 1 to 10 grading scale versus a 4.0 grading scale. I don't do much grading, at least, because in Fulbright we're not really supposed to grade anything that we don't assign.
Yeah.
And at least at my school, I don't really assign much, so I'm mostly just running lessons or teaching a lesson one day, but I'm not assigning homework or anything like that.
I mean, I'm not personally grading things either, really. I just happen to know about the grading scale, I guess. Also from when I was a student during study abroad, because they use the same grading scale. But basically, I think it's 1 to 10 or it's 0 to 10. 10 being the highest score you can achieve, and then 0 being nothing, or 1 being a very low score that you can achieve. So everything, all things considered, is probably scaled pretty equivalently to how it is on the 4.0 scale, but it's just a different method of grading. And so at the end of the semester, the trimester, however long their school term, there we go, is they get a grade from 1 to 10 instead of an A, B, C. It's not a letter grade, it's just a number. And also, I mean, just from my experience, it's a lot harder to get higher grades here in Spain, and it's much more normal. It wouldn't be considered necessarily bad or show a bad grade if you got a 7 or an 8, which would be a 70 or an 80, which in the US that wouldn't necessarily be considered bad either, but it definitely would be oh, I got a 70, that's not great, right? I don't know, that's my own bug.
I'm there too.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so one thing that I've heard a lot is that it's a lot harder to get higher grades because it's a very steep curve, so one student gets the highest grade.
Exactly.
I've heard it's also more common at northeastern schools, Ivy League schools, so maybe that has more to do also with just where we're from regionally. But yeah, so it's a lot more competitive, which I think kind of in turn makes it feel a little less serious to try and get such a high grade because you know you're not going to. So I think that also kind of affects attitudes.
I think it definitely affects school attitudes. I think one big thing that I noticed that is a difference too is at least in my high school or middle school, there was a lot of effort to maintain school spirit. And here it's not, I don't really think it's that much of a thing. There's not really sports teams or clubs, and I don't know if that's mostly because of the pandemic. I'm guessing it's that's part of it. But at my school and my secondary high school, middle school, whatever you want to call it, we had rallies and school spirit days and stuff like that to try to get people to have school spirit and care about actually just being there at the school. But that's not really a thing here. It seems school's just a thing that most kids have to do, and so they do it.
Yeah. It's interesting because one thing that, I'm going to say interesting less in this one, but one thing that they told us a lot going in, they being the Fulbright Commission in our orientation, they mentioned how extracurriculars aren't as much of a thing here, and so because we have to have a side project, a lot of people will try and start something at their schools. They said not to be confused or worried if the students don't know what you're talking about because they don't really do things at school. So I work at a vocational school, so it's gonna be different no matter what. It's not a high school, it's a college. But when I actually mentioned extracurriculars, my students were no, that's a thing. We've done those. And it's hard to tell because we're here during a pandemic, but I think that they might have had more extracurriculars in previous years. But it's a very small school, so also it's hard to tell. It's hard to know what they would do.
It seems a lot of kids do sports and most extracurricular activities outside of the school setting. They have other clubs or other places that they go to do stuff. But yeah, I think it's hard to get a truly accurate picture of that right now with everything that's been going on. So yeah, moving on.
What's next?
What's next? Next is general schedule and how schedules are run. So for Fulbright, we are supposed to teach between like 12 to 18 hours at the school. So I work 16 hours a week.
And I work 12 hours a week.
12, yeah, so it just depends what's the best fit for the school that you're at. And I mean, Loda also has to travel to go to school.
Yeah,
So-
I was traveling 6 hours a week at one point, and then also I didn't really get to prep at school, so I was working at home. So it averaged out to more.
Yeah, which is just crazy. I get to prep at work, so that's good. So usually I don't have to do work at home.
Now a lot of my students have left to work their internships on the second level, so I now have some blocks that I can prep at school. I think this is the first week they've left, so I'm still kind of adjusting to that new schedule.
It's interesting too because it seems like most teachers teach about 12 to maybe 14 hours in the classroom, so it's kind of funny that like some of the assistants teach more than the actual teachers.
She got a text!
I've got a text! I've got a text, mate!
It's a phone call, but it's from Madrid, and I don't know anyone in Madrid, so I'm gonna let it go to voicemail. So that's kind of interesting that sometimes it seems like English assistants or other assistants teach more classes than the teachers. It makes sense because they want to try to get as much exposure to English as they can for their students, so it makes sense, but it's just another interesting observation. I don't know what it's like for foreign auxiliaries that come to the US.
That's so odd though, because there's 5 days in the week, and you're only there 4 days a week. What? The math.
At least some of the teachers have told me I teach more than they do. But another thing that I think is quite interesting and definitely different than most schools in the US is it seems like for the most part teachers rotate classrooms. And again, I don't know if this has to do with the pandemic specifically, how things are rotating. But I did a little research and I think it's pretty standard actually. But students tend to stay in like the same class or kind of like bounce between like 1 or 2, maybe 3 classrooms. And the teachers are the ones that rotate through all of the classrooms. That's definitely different than the US. Most of the time in the US, like a teacher has a designated classroom that like maybe is just theirs or they share it with like 1 or 2 other teachers maybe. And then the students rotate. It's a small thing, but it's another thing that's kind of unique compared to the US. And I also think it's part of the reason why like the classrooms, at least at my school, are incredibly bare. There's like no decorations or signs or posters or like anything. Like occasionally like there's like a
Corkboard?
Corkboard, yes. Thank you. Just me poking into the air. A corkboard in the back of bulletin board. That's the word I was truly looking for corkboard spices. And sometimes they'll post like flyers and stuff back there.
In my school, it's the same. Although that's actually kind of interesting for a high school that only the teachers rotate. That probably makes for a pretty like, I don't know, way less stressful class change though. Not having hundreds of kids in the hall. But yeah, my school is pretty similar. The school day is kind of broken up. So whenever they have breaks, they do all leave the classroom anyway. But they're usually in the same room for 2 hours or 4 hours in the day. And then we rotate. And then of course I rotate because I'm going all over the place so we teach my different classes.
Yeah.
But I will say that there's usually stuff. I'm trying to think of all the classrooms I go in. And they all have some type of stuff on the wall somewhere. Or like one of them is for the hairdressers and the beauticians. So there's just like sinks in the back. Like there's something in there.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so it's not too bare.
Yeah, it's definitely dependent on where you are, but most of my classrooms are incredibly bare. Sometimes teachers will hang like some student work up, but it's pretty minimal.
Is that the same from like the little kids up to the...
Well, I don't have little kids.
Or how's with your
Well,
youngest?
I have 12-year-olds.
That's little.
Okay. Yes, same then
If
for
you're
all
younger
of
than
them.
20, you're little.
For all of them then, yes. Okay,
Okay.
so all my kids are little except one class then.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing, I feel like we need like an interesting counter.
God.
But another thing that is unique, I think, to schools here, maybe unique to my school, I think that they have them in a lot of schools though. My school has like a full-on like cafe.
Oh,
Like,
mine does not.
to go get a coffee and like
Does Katie have
pastries. I don't know. Katie!
What?
Your school have a cafe?
Nope.
Nope.
Wow.
Alright, so just my school. So my school has a cafe and you can go and get a coffee, and the barista lady who runs it, she's super nice.
Oh,
Yeah, and the coffee's cheap, it's only €1.
dang.
So
They
you
paying
get coffee.
you? This is sponsored by the cafe at Sarah's school.
At Cosme Garcia.
There's a link in the bio.
No, but usually the teachers like go out and like treat, like one person treats everyone to coffee, so.
That's beautiful. Yeah, we don't have that. We did have a little machine, but they said that it doesn't work anymore because of COVID. And I'm like, why would COVID keep us from using a machine to get individual coffees? I don't really understand. But that's fine. I didn't really want vending machine coffee. Although I have had it before, actually.
It's not bad.
It's not bad, really, so let me not knock it. But yeah, we don't have a cafe. Although we do meet for our break. We have a little meeting room that we all sit in, and they'll bring snacks, which they also said they didn't do because of COVID, and then immediately started doing again. Anyway, which I'm fine with. They're usually very good snacks. But it is tough because one of my teachers often wants to invite me out for coffee, but because my school's kind of far back from the center of the city, we can't really go anywhere, especially when there's a lockdown. You didn't even know if you were gonna find anywhere that was open. So that is a pretty common thing. That's one thing they actually also told us to be on the lookout for, was teachers inviting you out for coffee and, you know, covering it sometimes and, you know, not covering it and going often and kind of integrating into your school, which we were all nervous about because there's a pandemic and we were like, how does that work? But I mean, you guys just go stand outside and drink coffee and
yeah. So it's pretty
no
chill.
one's died yet.
Yeah, it's been fine. The teachers are pretty good about like masks and stuff. But it's interesting because like there's a cafe, like a coffee shop basically. And I think during normal times students are allowed to buy things from there too, but right now because of the pandemic it's only available for teacher use. But there's no like cafeteria, like a traditional cafeteria like you would have at a school in the US because kids don't eat lunch at school. Like even under normal circumstances, you would either go until like 2 or 3 p.m. and then you would go home and have lunch, or you would go until like, I don't know, 1 or 2-ish. Then you would go home for 2 hours, I think. And you have lunch and you have a rest, and then you come back to school. So there's no like cafeteria or like food distribution facility. I mean, there's like a vending machine for snacks, but there's no like food distribution facility on campus because kids don't eat lunch at school. I don't know if there's one at your school.
A cafeteria, no. The students get not the students, we all get a break from 10:10 to 10:40. Everyone's brought their own snack for that. And then we go back, and then I have a 10-minute break later, and I think the students are also kind of out and about, but I'm usually like tucked away in some office and it's only 10 minutes, so I'm never really out, so I'm not really sure what their thing is. But no, we don't have, if there's a kitchen, but that's just for faculty use, and no one's really using it because we don't want to mix our stuff too much.
And then the other thing that I feel like is about like kind of like a general thing about schools, that it's funny because it often like surprises Spanish students, or they like frequently inquire as to whether or not we had lockers in the schools.
That was the
in the
question
US.
I got
It's
more
like,
than any other. I mean, there's no lockers anywhere in your school?
I think some school, not my school doesn't have any lockers.
Huh.
I think some schools here do have lockers.
Yeah, they want to know if it's like the movies. And I'm like, that's the thing from the movies that you're most curious about? Yeah, lockers.
And also
We have
it's
them.
not like the movies. I don't know. Well, it is, I guess. But
I guess in the movies it's the long, tall lockers, and I've not been to a school that has those. It's always top and bottom ones. Bottom lockers, they're lesser class of humans. You want to be a top locker.
You do want to be a top locker. When I hear like, oh, do you have lockers at your school? My brain just goes like straight to that scene from High School Musical when Sharpay is opening like her really long locker and she pulls out like a full like wardrobe change. Which is like a pull-out clothing.
Not like that movie.
No, we don't have lockers like that.
We don't have lockers like that. We have normal lockers. One time, so in 8th grade, there were enough lockers or not enough students, and so everyone got a top locker, and you could just like rent a bottom locker. So my friends and I got a bottom one and filled it with snacks. So it kind of was like a movie.
That's smart.
It's like a movie in a way. A movie where we had food snacks on demand.
I never used my locker in high school.
Were you allowed to carry your backpack around?
Yeah.
We were not allowed to carry a backpack around. And so I've been telling my students that like it's a thing in the whole country. Apparently it's not. But yeah, we weren't allowed to carry our backpacks around at any point from middle or high school. And we could carry, we could have purses, we could have big
Is it like a
purses.
Georgia thing?
It might be a southern thing. It might, I don't know. It's a vaguely school shooting thing. But yeah, we couldn't have big bags. So I had to use my locker.
That makes sense.
Actually, that's not true. I carried my backpack around despite the law, my goodness, despite the rules that we couldn't have backpacks until I got in trouble. And then I had to use my locker.
I mean, I had stuff that I had to store, but my mom also worked in my high school, so I used to just put my stuff in her locker.
That's valid.
Lockers were commonly used, I just didn't use mine.
Wow. Indeed.
Yeah. Wow, I'm so unique and quirky. I didn't use a locker.
I don't use
I don't use lockers. I'm not that kind of girl. Oh my God, I hate myself. Anyways, that was our start of some classroom comparisons between the US and Spain. There's a lot of information and a lot of stuff that we can talk about, so I think we're going to end up doing a part 2 of this series, not a lot of the series, we're going to do more videos in the series. Yes. Part 2 of this topic.
I keep looking over here. I can't see this. I have terrible eyesight, so I can actually see the list, so I can't read off what we're going to discuss next. But we'll be discussing more things later, so stay tuned if you're at all interested in some cultural comparisons. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.
Bye!